All right, we're back. How y'all doing out there? This is Vincent Faney on segment 2 of the interview. Basically, I ran out of steam on the first hour of the interview. I didn't think that the interview was going to take more than an hour. Douglas and Bill decided they have a lot more questions and want to pinpoint me down. And so I needed to take a couple hour nap because of my health situation I got going. Anyways, just for those of you who maybe, just in case you were on the first video, we left off with a question that Bill had asked me. Now I answered that question, or I was gonna answer the question. Anyways, I'll reiterate his question and I'll answer him first off, okay? So you all can know this is the video that is the interview that is where I explain my plan, my goal, my plan to how to raise money to get affordable housing for veterans or people. So one day I'd like to see people paying at least 50% less than what the banks are charging. Anyways, Bill asked, his last question was, when I told him this plan and my goals and so forth and what motivated me, he wanted to know my history and what motivated me. Basically, let me put on my reading glasses because I can't read these questions that him and Douglas are typing in without these. I have a tough time. He asked, last question, okay, all that sounds good, but what happens if you and your friends are unable to raise the money for the houses? How committed are you for this project? And then he goes on to ask, what would you do if you fell short of your goal to pay off the repo? Would you simply pocket the money? Because the question is basically, what would happen if the house, say the repo would still cost $250,000 and I only had $150,000, and obviously whatever reason he wondered what would happen if I didn't come up with the rest. What would I do? Well, I'm so committed to this this goal that, like I told him, I would gladly put my own house up, my own residence, which I love. I mean, all my life I've moved around a lot. I've always wanted to have roots and have a specific house of which I can feel comfortable in till I die. And my house is, I love my house. It needs a lot of work, but I love it. And it's the only house during my entire life which I feel grounded, okay? And yet, if things didn't happen, if I didn't get the money to buy the repos or whatever that I was looking at, I would move into my converted ambulance and get it running and live in that converted ambulance and sacrifice my house, move veterans or other people who are disabled on a limited income. That's what I would do. So that's what I said. In the meantime, before I shut down the interview, he typed in another question, which is already on the computer. Which is kind of nice because I don't have to read and try to read it as he types. So this is from Bill again. Remember, Bill was almost non-existent with any of the questions in the first interview, at least the first half. Okay, so he said, well, that's a nice promise, but how do you convince the public that your goals are sincere? After all, we live in a day and age where charity scams are all too common. And he's asked, do you simply, Vince, expect people to simply take you at your word? No means, Bill, by no means. I think it's important that people first get to know the integrity of the person that they're dealing with. And I am coming forward with some pretty, talking some pretty grand plans. And so when anybody does that, whether they're a politician or financial analyst or advisor or whatever, you got to know one way or another what the integrity is. And sometimes that's from talking to people who've done business with them, people who know them. If you could get involved with some sort of public records of anything they've done, that sort of thing would be helpful. So one thing I wanted to know is one thing I want to share, or the questions that people wonder about. These are common questions because when I've been talking about my plans over the years, people frequently ask what Bill's asking. They ask a variety of questions that try to pin me down. Basically, they want to know, am I credible? Can I be trusted? Do I have a history of doing what I say I'm going to do, or am I just talk like most people? That was the one frustrating thing about working with people at the post office. very intellectual, very educated, very bright. They had some incredible ideas, perfect ideas sometimes, but they couldn't get out of the talking stage. I see that on Facebook a lot. People are posting all these little memes and what we should do and little things, but that's all they're doing is talking, but now it's on Facebook. Drives me nuts. People want to know what my history is. I think that's important to see that I'm going to come through. They want to know if I'm a stand-up guy. That's the question. Are you a stand-up guy? How do we know that you're a stand-up guy? Or are you the kind of person that throws people under the bus at the first, sign that things are going to get tough? That was something I learned, at the post office. When things got tough, and other things in life, people just leave. A lot of people say they want to do good things, but then, and that's what people say. Are you swayed by self-enrichment? Is this just a scam for you to get rich? How do we know it's not a scam? Or, am I the type of person who puts the needs of his friends and family and community at the level of his own or above my own? Basically, it's just important that that they understand what the history and my ethos is. You need to do that with everybody you deal with. If you're dating somebody and you're thinking about marrying them, if you think about going into business with them, if you think you're becoming friends, these are things I want to talk about later, because at my age, on Facebook or in coffee shops or when I talk to people, they're always talking about, I just wish I would have known more about my friend. Because a lot of times we go through life, people experience betrayals and people they do it being two-faced. Well, while I was talking, Douglas had typed up a question. So let me see. Douglas typed up a question for me. He goes, okay then, what is your history? Oh, shit. Okay, now vision's blurring. What motivates you, Vincent Feeney, to take on such a task and to see that this dream happens? How can we be certain that you are a man of integrity? Now, he has a question. How can I be certain? The question is, am I a man of integrity? I said I am. How can I make you certain about that? These are questions that every man and woman should be confronted with, especially when they're like me or a politician or whatever. They're seeking to gather other people's trust and their help. People in the community to help them with their cause. So it'd be foolish for people just to dive in without really knowing. Now, an easier question I would say is to ask, what doesn't motivate me? I have such a long laundry list of things that I've experienced in life that motivates me. I mean, so many things I experienced. Observing at the earliest age, many have many dysfunctional relatives, people who were heavy drinkers and abusive to their spouse, if not physically, emotionally, neglectful to their kids, just erratic, irrational, overly hysterical people. They weren't Ted Bundy evil or anything like that, but there was a lot of issues I observed as a kid that I thought was appalling. I remember the hypocrisy of the nuns of the high school I went, not the high school, the grade school I went to at St. Francis of Assisi in Norristown, Pennsylvania. The nuns back then, in the 60s, they were brutal. On one hand, they talk about the love of God and Jesus and compassion and forgive thy neighbor and tolerance and compassion and love and just patience. And then they beat the crap out of you with a big yardstick with the metal edge. My parents' divorce, they had an issue. My dad, when he assaulted my mother when we were in third grade and fourth grade. And then they talked about the divorce. It was hard to see my dad, when he hit my mom and we just begging him to stop. And then, of course, after that, there was their divorce, and that was tough. That was traumatic. That was in the time when divorce was very uncommon, considered scandalous almost, and so that was pretty bad. Then my dad did his neglect afterwards, and the neglect of many of my relatives on all sides of the family, but especially his side of the family, because it was a weird situation. People don't like to hang out with people who are embattled. The old saying that blood's thicker than water. People don't want to hang out with the woman that their blood is divorcing or getting divorced from. Okay, and there's other things that motivated me. Like, for instance, right afterwards, my mom moved to North Carolina to be around her relatives who were a bunch of poor sharecroppers and Many of them were good people, but very dysfunctional in a way. And quite frankly, there was the situation where my mother was forced to work 2 full-time jobs, waitress jobs, to put food on the table. My dad was a deadbeat dad. He was bitter and he was angry and resentful, and he was going to punish my mother by punishing all of us, and he was not going to pay child support. Damn it! And it was so my mother had to work 24/7 to put food on the table. A lot of nights that my brother and I would, we never went without food, but we always felt like we weren't getting enough protein or something. We always felt starved, like we were starving. And I remember the racism that we experienced when we first moved to North Carolina. Back then in the 60s, they had race riots in Watts. They had African Americans were fighting for their rights. They wanted equal rights. And in the South, they were very much against that. And in the South, you had a lot of people, these poor, many of them, quite frankly, were ignorant sharecroppers who looked at anybody who was black or African American or Italian or Mediterranean or Hispanic as being a person of color. And I remember being called the N-word and being beat up quite a few times for being a Yankee and a Catholic, a Papist, they call us, and and so forth. So I know what it's like to experience racism firsthand, to witness the Watts riots on TV and so forth. And then later on, when I went in the Marines, I noticed this, when I went to Fort Bliss, Texas for Hawk missile training. And I remember going to Juarez and the fringes of Juarez, I called them the Outlands, where I saw such mind-numbing, like just abject, soul-crushing poverty. And it made the poverty I experienced as a kid like pale, or any time in my life, pale by comparison, really. And so later, when I was forced out of the Marines due to an injury, that really pissed me off, because I got to see the mindlessness and the pettiness of bureaucracies. And I didn't have to be forced out. They could have let me rehab and stayed in, because I really wanted to stay in and become a lifer. I guess that's how dysfunctional I was. But I was forced out. I had no skills. I dropped out of high school, no education. And so to be forced out into a world, I had a willingness to work. I liked working. But to like have no skills and no money and a car that wasn't reliable, and I'm working 2 full-time jobs at a janitor jobs to live in a ghetto section of this area, town that I was forced to live. And I remember, like, a friend of mine from high school, he had an addiction problem to drugs, and he was almost not working. He couldn't contribute. He wasn't working. He was too busy getting high, and it was just a mess. And now, even though I worked 2 full-time jobs, my problem was I didn't know how to manage my money. I liked working. I liked making lots of money, as much money as I could, but I didn't know anything about investing or saving. Didn't know anything about what it would take to buy a house or to save for a house. I just knew that money was there to pay your bills, and then to use whatever you didn't need to pay your bills with, to put a little aside for a rainy day, I suppose. But then the rest was, I used it for partying, for just hanging out. Yeah, and now many times I asked my stepfather, my father, about investing advice, because my stepfather said whenever I spent money, well, you need to save your money. And I'm like, well, okay, save for what? How do I save it? When I save it, what do I do with it? Money, I just knew money was meant to buy things. But he didn't, and my stepfather said, hey, nobody taught us, you're going to have to learn on your own. We don't want to accidentally give you bad advice. But not even like a door to where I should go and look into, no books that I should study, just like, you just got to save your money. And I remember doing that as a kid, saving lots of money until I was a teenager. I had lots of, just money, for what? So I overspent my money. I put myself in a hole. That's, if I could speak, whenever I speak to kids, I try to give them some advice that my fathers wouldn't give me. Now, in 1976, I experienced homelessness after I lost my 2 crappy jobs. The one night janitorial job, the people lost their contract, so that's one job out. Like I said, I couldn't afford to live where I was living. I got another friend in a more ghetto part of town asked me to move in with him, so the rent would be cheaper for me. And then after the place was robbed, after he was robbed at gunpoint when I was out of town, he freaked out and just gave up the apartment. I couldn't afford it myself. So I'm living in a little camper. I got a camper, so I thought, well, I'll live for free I'll work at this one place as a janitor and pay off my debt. I owed some doctor bills, and I believed in paying off the debt. And then once my other job found out that I was living in a camper, since I worked as a janitor at a country club, they thought that would be not suitable presence to have a person like me working there, so they fired me. So now I just have no money, no job, and I'm living in a 6x10 camper. And that fall, they fired me right before winter. I nearly froze to death. A lot of nights the temperatures went down to 5 below zero. And anybody who's lived in a car or a camper, metal camper or trailer, mobile home, knows that if you don't have heat, it often feels colder inside, damp and cold, like a refrigerator, even than outside. And I just had nothing to sleep, no sleeping bag. I had a sleeping bag that was stolen. And so I had just a pile of threadbare, dirty clothes, no place to wash my clothes, no place to I had no water, no heat, nothing to cook with, no bathroom. So that was pretty tough. And my car, my transportation, I wrecked my car. I didn't have the money to get it fixed, didn't have money to get another one. And like I said, I was at odds with my stepfather at the time. Poor, I mean, I'm on okay terms with him now. There's a lot of things I respect, but there's things I wasn't on good terms with, and I was too ashamed and embarrassed to go to them for help and say, let me move back in, or help me out, or give me some money. I didn't know, I didn't even have a clue on how to ask for that. That's something that I just wasn't taught, I guess. And, during that winter, from lack of food, although, quite admittedly, I remember a couple times going into a supermarket and stealing food. I was so hungry. I remember a couple times walking to some industrial park, sneaking into some place and going in the lunchroom and stealing someone else's lunch. That's how bad it was. And yet, despite all that, I remember just still starving to death. Before moving into losing my job, I weighed 175 pounds solid because I ate pretty well. And I lifted weights, and I was young, and I weighed 175 pounds, not a scrap of fat on me. Next thing you know, I weigh 130. And I looked like a skinned rabbit, just ribs, no pecs, just ribs and knobby joints. And I looked tired, I felt tired, I was depressed. And the next thing I know is that my father had moved up from from Florida to visit his relatives. He was doing well in Florida. But, quite frankly, before then, or even after he left, there's so many times in the winter that the state police, Pennsylvania State Police, or some other local police officer or whatever, knew that the camper was being used by somebody homeless, and they would bang on the door, knock on the door, and then they would I'd peek out and I'd see their car, and maybe sometimes there's two of them out there, and they're screaming, "We know you're in there, we're going to get the crowbar and just force the door open. Then you'll really be in trouble. Things will go easier for you if you just come out." And I'm laying under the clothes, and there's my heart beating real hard and fast, and my breath raspy, and I'm trying to keep quiet, afraid that they would hear me. And they never opened it up. They never forced their way in, which is good. But the thing is my father came up from Florida, and he was basically, he had heard through my brother that I was in this situation. And my brother, even though my dad was never paid child support and basically just threw us out under the bus, my brother still wanted to have a relationship with him, so he kept in contact with my father where I didn't. And my father had come, and I tried a couple times to repair things with him, but my dad's, he was not very concerned about his kids, except as it's just that's a long story for another time, quite frankly. And anyways, he came up, and he's got his my brother said, "Yeah, I saw Dad, and I told him what's going on, and he might come by and see you." And he's got he's a member of the marina. He's he had real estate, and he was a part owner of a bank that him and some other investors started, and an owner of a strip club, and he was doing well. My dad was the kind of guy that liked to brag and always talk about how he's doing, and then on the other hand, he was afraid like shit they're going to ask me for money or wonder why I'm not helping him out. Then he would tell me how times are going tough. So when he came up in his Cadillac and he saw me and I was big, I was like saying, "Look, could you help me get connected with one of your friends? I need a job. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for a handout. I just want a job. Just get me hooked up with a job." Get me on the Merchant Marines. I could become a deckhand or a dishwasher like you did when you first started. And he said he wouldn't let me. He would blackball me if I tried to get into any other lines, any other company. And I just remember the absolute hatred I felt for him, especially when he was disingenuous and trying to say, "Hey, nobody helped me, and and this would be a great adventure for me if I was doing this. This would be great. You're young. This would be fun." And I'm like starving to death. Anyways, it's kind of emotionally numbing. And the thing is, to be homeless back then was like a lot more shameful and unusual than it is today. You were looked at as like some sort of mentally ill, total misfit, a loser. Now it's just common. People just say, "What's the economy? It's the way the nation's going." And so, in a way, I find that to be much more disturbing, and that's what motivates me to do what I want to do. And I got to tell you, that whole thing was just so many things like that motivates me. You know what? I moved out to Oregon, and I got on my feet for a while, and I got hired on as a casual at the post office back east, and then I decided to move out to Oregon because I heard the economy's good and that I could get on, and I got interviewed with the Postal Service here, and they talked about that if I moved out, that I'd likely get a job right away. That was just BS, and I moved out and I started the gym because I had money saved. Didn't know how to really operate a business. That first time I operated a business, and that's that, And the next thing I know, the economy had crashed. The person who convinced me, a guy from Pennsylvania, moved out there, and he forgot to tell me that the economy was crashed, and one half of the houses were empty and going into repo, and nobody wanted to hire somebody from out of state. They were looking to just hire people in state. I remember 1,000 people, applying for one dishwasher job. It was just amazing. So, that was my education out here. And at 2 years of just, courting homelessness after the gym went under, and to scrabble jobs together. Only jobs I could get is like a day at a security job at a lumber mill there, and another day or so at a fast food joint, and then tree planting, which is a tough job, and bouncing, and there's some exotic dancing at this little sleazy place. I did a little bit of that just to get some money, anything, a scrap here and there. And then eventually I got a job at the Postal Service. But right before I got that job at the Postal Service here in Eugene, I basically was looking behind the wooded areas of LCC, wondering where I'm going to put my tent. Well, I didn't even have a car, just had a motorcycle. Rode that around in the winter, and I just was going to camp out behind LCC and used our locker room in the gym. So, cause I was taking some classes there, but the post office came around after 2 years, and I kept on hitting upon them. And quite frankly, they were pushing me under the rug because my friend had been married to some woman that was bad talking. That's another story. It was just a bad time. And I love working at the post office. It's the easiest blue-collar job I ever worked. The easiest blue-collar that made good money. You got 5 paid weeks vacation a year, 4 paid sick leave, 10 paid holidays. If you worked over 8 hours, if you work from the 9th and 10th hour, time and a half, the 11th and 12th, double time on some of the holidays like Christmas. You have my civil service retirement. You could put a TSP added onto it where they meet you dollar for dollar for X amount. Great job. I was warm, I was dry, I was still moving around, doing parcels, keying letters, listening to books on tape. They allowed you to listen to the radio. I met some friends there, very educated people that I would listen to about their careers, or not their careers, or schooling and what they knew. Very educated people who liked to chat about what they knew. It was all great. All, for me, it was perfect. Even though all of them felt like they were wage slaves at $25 an hour. And I worked perfect hours. For me, perfect hours. I like working swing shift. I like getting off at 2 in the morning. Sometimes I worked from 6 to 6:30. I sucked up all the overtime I could, lived as frugally as I could, and I started investing my money. So I loved it. For me, it was perfect. But, life has other things, And basically, eventually, I developed some sort of chronic lung infections all the time. And I didn't know why. And the doctors thought I had Willamette Valley fever. And the next thing I know, I'm involved in a lawsuit for the right to wear a respirator, a whole bunch of us, because a whole bunch of us started getting lung infections, and we finally realized most of our problems for most of us was the air at work, the paper dust, the varnish, the inks, and so forth, the organic vapors. And the union basically, years prior to this was complaining about the dust, and they were complaining about everything. And the union is a subject I'd like to talk about in another situation. This is probably why I lean towards being a libertarian in a way. I mean, I think we should have unions, but, there's something I would like to talk about. Anyways, the union not only didn't help us that much, did the minimal to do anything. They basically told the rest of the rank and file not to stand up, not to go to stand up for us to say anything, because they would be targeted, and that the only protection we had was them, and it was only them who were going to voice things in grievance and arbitration, that we should just basically kowtow to them and let them have charge. So anyways, I see that Bill is typing up a question for me, so let me see. Excuse me. Okay, Bill's asked, Vince, you mean the union refused to represent you? Come on now, isn't that illegal? Okay. Well, Bill, yes, it is. It's illegal, and but the thing is, they did the minimal to cover their ass. They did the minimal required by law, and that's simply they just filed a grievance. They filed grievances like you'd wipe your ass with toilet paper. It was nothing. And the thing is, even if it was a poorly constructed grievance, and they basically ignored the advice of some legal aid to where people would actually anyways, that's just another subject, and I could get on that. Okay, right now I'm fading out pretty fast again. I need to lay down for a bit, and then can we finish this interview? I mean, you guys are still in Idaho, right? Yeah, okay. If I wake up another hour, will you guys be available? I could contact and we could do this, because I need to lay down, because I'm feeling dizzy. And anyways, my friends out there on Facebook, I'm so sorry for this. Again, my health is one of the reasons why I feel a little bit like in a race against time to try to get something done before, just in case anything happens. So I'm going to sign off for now. All right, thanks.